Hey, I'm Ryan from Color Between, and today I'm going to help you find your film look. Now, first of all, I'm not going to sit here and tell you, slap this film LUT on your footage, suddenly it's going to look like Joker. Doesn't work that way. That LUT was designed for those shots under that lighting with those lenses. That's where the look comes from. It's not from the film LUT. Instead, we're going to be exploring a tool that you might already have in your arsenal, and that's DaVinci Resolve's Film Look Creator, included in the studio license. We're going to be taking a look at the flexibility that it offers compared to a simple film LUT, and we're going to explore some techniques that you can use to apply some of that film magic to your own footage. Now, you might say to me, Ryan, why do we even chase this film look? We've got these amazing modern digital cameras like this Sony that I've got here that can capture ultra sharp 4K with huge dynamic range and pretty much perfect autofocus. It's a perfect image. Why do we go after this film look? Well, I think if you take a look at the work of people like Steve Yedlin and his amazing display prep demo, or the wild success of Fujifilm, their cameras and their film simulations, they prove that there is something there in that partnership between a modern digital camera with those film aesthetics. That's the lens that we're going to be using when we take a look at Film Look Creator. Let's jump in. Okay, so now we're here inside of DaVinci Resolve, and I've got some wedding footage that has been shot on various Sony cameras. And we can see this footage is, nicely exposed. It's very clear. It's very, sharp 4K footage, as we spoke about in the intro. So let's use Film Look Creator to kind of dirty it up a little bit. Let's knock off some of that digital edge. So on the timeline level of my nodes, I'm going to turn on Film Look Creator, and I've prepared this look here. We can see that it's quite a strong vintage look. It's quite muted, quite flat, very typical of film. If you wanted to dial this look back a little bit, we do have the Film Look Blend, which we can see there as a slider, allows us to bring back some of that color. So to really help sell this look, which is quite popular for weddings, people love kind of like a vintage touch to wedding footage. I'm also going to turn on the film gate at the bottom here. So we can see that kind of locks us into a smaller kind of film slide, and you do have different options here that you can select, but I'm going to stick with our 35mm silent option. And that's going to give us a really nice aspect ratio, which is quite different from our regular 4K footage that we would shoot straight out of the camera. Now, to help sell this look a little bit further, I'm also using Film Look Creator alongside a few other built-in effects. First one being the film damage, which I've got applying after here, just to add a little bit of dirt on top of the footage. So we can see as I play it back here, those little dust spots that are popping up. We can also turn on a scratch, and then before the Film Look Creator, I'm actually also applying another new effect, which is the color tone diffuser. And I'm just using this to kind of, mellow out the contrast a little bit more, but also add a little bit of diffusion in there. Kind of give a bit of a feeling of pre-flashed film, which has quite an interesting look, especially in the shadows. This is something that you'd really have to play around with as you put it on the footage. But I've dialed that in here to give us this very vintage sort of look. You can see as I toggle that on and off. In total, as I turn this on and off, we can see we go from very kind of clean and modern looking footage, and then we're jumping into our kind of more vintage touch. One other thing I do want to mention when you are using effects like Film Look Creator, which are applying stuff like film grain, maybe some bloom and halation and things like that, playback performance can be a challenge, especially if you're working with 4K footage. You'll notice that when I hit play here, we're getting, pretty quickly we're getting to real-time playback. That's actually because I've changed my playback settings here in the timeline playback resolution. If I switch this back to a full resolution and I hit play, you'll notice that our playback frame rate is terrible. So just something to keep in mind when you are using these effects. When you're going through the edit process, it can be really nice just to switch this over to something like quarter, just to help us get better playback performance. Okay, next up, I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that a film LUT can't do. And so we're going to be talking about film texture. This is our Rec 709 footage that we can see here. You know, it looks pretty good, but maybe I want to apply this amazing film LUT that I've got. So here's a film LUT. It's quite a strong look. We can see it's quite contrasty, pretty low saturation. So why would I want to use something like Film LUT Creator when I can just apply a LUT like that and it's done? Turning on Film LUT Creator, obviously we've got a little bit of a different look in play, but there's some controls that we just cannot do inside of a LUT. And that's because LUTs are not able to actually apply spatial effects. Inside of Film LUT Creator, we have a toggle that we can turn on and off here, which basically turns off the effects which wouldn't be able to be saved inside of a LUT. And I'm going to start off by talking about halation. Halation is actually a byproduct of the photochemical process. It's something that happens when light is traveling through the film strip and actually hits the bottom layer and reflects back through. And we get this kind of almost like bleeding effect. It's usually visible where we've got really bright specular highlights. So if I turn that on and off, we can see just around the kind of lights that are here. In fact, if I crank that up a little bit, we can see it's quite visible. I would say that halation is something that you want to not go too strong on. I think if it's overdone, it tends to look a little bit cheesy. But a little bit of halation is actually quite nice and definitely sells the film effect. Very closely related to halation is actually bloom. Bloom is much harder to see within this footage. It is having a very small effect. I mean, we can see within the scopes down here that it is having a very small effect. It's basically mimicking the scattering of light inside of the film. So it will, you know, serve to kind of smooth out the highlights a little bit. It's kind of similar to using a mist filter on the front of your lens. You have the option of controlling the radius, so if you want it to bloom out a little bit further, so you can just see it showing up on the footage there. In contrast to bloom not having too much of an effect here is our grain. As I kind of crank up the grain, we can see that impacting the image quite a lot. Grain is something which is really recognizable about film, and something which, you know, I really enjoy looking at film grain and kind of getting a film grain just right. Some of the controls which I think are quite useful to know, the saturation control. This is really nice if you want your grain to blend in a little bit more. If this is cranked up, you can see on the image there, it looks more like digital noise, and you can see the scopes kind of go quite hot as we crank up the saturation. So turning this down is a nice way to have your grain actually blend in, as well as, of course, controlling the amount. Size will just change the size of that grain. And then the other control, which I think is really nice, this actually softens the image underneath the grain. Film grain tends to be the sharpest thing in a film print, so this is emulating that particular effect. So let's say that you have created a look that you really like and you do want to save that as a LUT, or you want to save it as a preset or a power grade that you can import to other projects. And let's say this combination that we've got here, so using the diffuser, the Film LUT Creator, and our film dirt is the look that we want to save. I'm going to show you my process. So first thing is going to be to save a still of this. All right, so right clicking on the viewer, grab still. That's actually saved a still with all of those nodes in it. Now, the advice that I always give when it comes to doing this process is don't do it inside of a timeline that you're editing. You know, pull it out into a separate timeline or onto a separate clip. And we want nothing going on this clip. So this is just an empty node that's here, and we're going to actually drag our still onto there. So we can see our look has been applied. The reason I recommend doing it this way is because we can go ahead and we can turn off anything that we don't actually want to be a part of this. So in this example, I actually don't want this component, OpenDRT, to be part of this look. So I can wipe that out. And even though our preview image kind of looks a little bit strange, that's fine because we just want to actually capture this as a really nice still. Now, as a little bonus tip to you, if you want to add some text to this still, which is great for making power grades, you can actually jump over to the edit page. We can grab a just some text, pop it on top there. Let's just call this vintage look, right? Definitely recommend that you make it quite large, just so that it is visible easily in the stills library. And now what we want to do is go ahead and grab a still. So we can see our vintage look. We've got a little thumbnail for our grade here. In the same respect as doing this, if you wanted to bake this out as a LUT, so we're just going to go ahead and grab Film Look Creator. We're going to make sure that we have this option turn on here, which is going to say 3D LUT compatible only. So it's going to remove all of our kind of textural spatial effects. We're going to choose the particular look that we want. Right, so we're going to leave it on cinematic. Now, the only other step that you need to take if you're going to export this as a LUT is make sure that your color space overrides are set up for the way that you want based on how you plan on using that LUT. Say, for example, I want to load this into my Sony camera. They would be the settings that I would want to use if I was generating a LUT for my Sony camera. And then the next step is to just right click on the clip down here and choose Generate LUT, and then 33 point cube would be the option to choose if you're exporting for a camera LUT. If it's a LUT that you plan to use inside of Resolve or another piece of editing software, then I would go to the 65 point cube instead. And just remember that you want your color space set up for the way that you plan on actually using that LUT. All right, so that is it for today's session. Hopefully you were able to take something away from what we're looking at today with Film Look Creator. And remember, Film Look Creator, you can use it in different ways. You can go all in on a look like what we did with our wedding footage, create something very vintage, very vibey, something very different from what went in. Or you can use it in a little bit more of a subtle way. So you just add a little bit of texture on top of your digital footage. I do encourage you all to spend a little bit of time building yourself some LUTs for your cameras or building yourself some power grades to use in future projects. I think that's a really great exercise. Once again, I'm Ryan from Color Between. If you have any questions or you want to check out my stuff, you can find me on Instagram at ColorBetween, or you can check out my website, colorbetween.com. All right, see you next time. Cheers.